We've understood the basics of how human activity is affecting the climate for actually about 150 or more years. We had James Hansen from NASA testify to the US Senate in the mid-80s about climate change and its impacts. We've had IPCC reports, now 5. They come out about once every 7 years. Each of them are thousands of pages long, collating and synthesising the science.
It is clear that the dominant factor explaining essentially all of the observed global scale warming over the last 50 years has been due to human activity, burning fossil fuels and land clearing, adding to greenhouse gases in the atmosphere.
The way I like to put it is climate is what you expect, but weather is what you get. So weather is what we experience day to day, and it is highly variable. That's the nature of the system. But to talk about climate, you need to average weather for at least 3 decades, and preferably more, to understand longer-term trends in how the system is changing. So to stand out on the beach in your Speedos freezing on one day does not say anything about a trend of a half a century or longer.
What we do know is that over the last 100 years, associated with the warming of the climate system, and particularly the warming of the ocean waters leading to expansion of the ocean waters and the melting of glaciers and ice caps in both Greenland and Antarctica, there's been sea level rise. Sea level rise of about that much, 27 centimetre increase in sea level rise globally, and it is likely to continue for the foreseeable future.
One of the most basic things we understand about climate change and greenhouse gases is that neither respects jurisdictional boundaries. The Earth system is a whole Earth system, and every single molecule of greenhouse gases goes towards affecting that climate system.
We can't say with absolute certainty for many extreme weather events whether that individual event was due to climate change or just due to natural variability. Because we know now that human-caused climate change is already affecting the global climate system, and that means that the atmosphere, the weather systems are changing. What we may not be able to do is distinguish how much has that human-caused climate change influenced specific types of events. And the easiest ones, and the ones that were first looked at in this new science of attribution of extreme weather and climate events, was to look at heat waves and extreme temperatures. And Australia was, in fact, one of the leaders in that attribution of extreme events, looking at increases in extreme temperatures in Australia. And one of the first cases was looking in 2012 and 2013, which was a record hot summer with temperatures that had averaged across the whole of the country that were hotter in summer by more than half a degree than the previous average temperatures ever experienced in a single summer season. And what we did was look at what was the risk of that event using multiple climate model simulations of that sort of an event occurring in the 2000s in a world or in simulations that included human changes in greenhouse gases and other human influences on the climate, and compared that. Now, we can't run experiments with the real world. We can't remove the greenhouse gases in the real world, but we can in climate models. So we reran the climate model simulations, not having any changes in greenhouse gases or other human influences on climate. And what we were able to show that this record temperatures occurred at least 5 times more commonly in sets of thousands of simulations with climate models in the period around the 2010 compared with the simulations that had no changes in the greenhouse gases. There was very high confidence that there was a dramatically increased risk or likelihood of this extreme event, the record summer temperatures in 2012 and 2013 occurring.
I don't think we have responded very well as a society and legally as well to science as a generalisation, and particularly to predictions and models, climate change predictions, all kinds of predictions, and we haven't responded all that well to that. And I think what we've learned about tonight in particular is attribution science as a scientific development that we need to engage with if we are not already doing it. It is a tool that can be used to really address some of these climate change risks much more quickly, because we are running out of time.
Good example of that is something called the carbon budget, which says that the temperature rise that we experience is roughly proportional to the amount of carbon we continue to emit. So what we can do is then work backwards, as we did in the Rocky Hill case, from the fact that Australia and virtually every country on the planet has signed the Paris Agreement. That gives you a temperature target range. That then tells you how much cumulatively humanity can emit to have, say, a 67%, two-thirds probability of meeting that. Then we can work backwards and say, how much have we already emitted? We can take into account other greenhouse gases, which are important, and some feedbacks. All that could be easily done in a table. The conclusion, and this is really important to link law and science, the conclusion is clear. We already have far more carbon facilities in operation today than we need to blow the Paris budget. So that tells you immediately that no new fossil fuel developments, be it coal, gas, unconventional gas, or oil, are permissible if you're serious about the Paris target.
The first duty, in my mind, of governments is to protect citizens. And if we think about that, their first duty in this context is to do everything that they can to prevent the risk from occurring. So the first thing is to think about preventing, in the first place, the emission of greenhouse gases from coal-fired power stations and from coal mines.
Can we separate out a couple of different aspects of government action? Let's assume the coal mine itself is being approved either by federal or state government, as we know is happening at the moment. Is your proposition as a legal proposition that the governments who are approving that are breaching obligations of international law or domestic law, or both?
I think that what decision makers need to do when they are considering whether or not to grant permission to new coal mines is to take into account international law, the scientific evidence, and they need to interpret the statutes under which they are either going to grant consent or not grant consent. And most statutes take into account now, they have a legal requirement that decision makers take into account in one way or another the principles of ecologically sustainable development. And if I might give an example of decision making, I would like to refer to Chief Judge Brian Preston's judgment when he was refusing a new coal mine that was being proposed by Gloucester Resources, because what he said is that the proposed mine is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Why? Well, at the wrong time, but because the greenhouse gas emissions of the coal mine and its coal product will increase global total concentrations of greenhouse gases at a time when what is now urgently needed in order to meet generally agreed climate targets is a rapid and deep decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. These dire consequences of climate change should be avoided. I think that in approving coal mines, we are explicitly approving the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And only 2 days ago.
But is the government thereby contributing to the increased likelihood of these adverse events?
Yes, it is.
In your view?
Yes.
And that's as a legal proposition?
Yes, it is.
Not just as a moral proposition?
No. I think that it has legal duties under statute, domestic statute, and under international law.
And often there's an argument that this coal mine or this coal-fired power station is just a drop in the ocean in terms of the global problem. But what the courts have been evolving through various cases, and Justice Preston's decision is a good example, is the idea that because climate change is a cumulative impact problem, that means it is the sum of many parts, the sum of many impacts over time. You can't just look at each individual impact in isolation. It's important to consider its cumulative impact.
to argue that you can ship off coal somewhere else to be burnt and therefore absolve oneself of responsibility is, in my view, morally unacceptable.